Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to Teaser Season for patch 3.29. Today is day 2 of Teaser Season. I honestly wasn't expecting very much information today. I was expecting Granny Games would tease a very minor piece of quality of life updates, and that this would be a pretty calm and sedate start to Teaser Season. Well, I was very wrong on that front. Granny Games gave us not one, but 2 new Transfigured gems that are coming in patch 3.29. But not only did they give us the gems, they also gave us a whole bunch of information to do a deep dive into their mechanics, and also the stats at level 1. Now, the stats at level 1 can help you predict potentially what they're going to look like at gem level 20, but they're also just a good starting point because they give you the baseline feel for the gem. Level 20 can have additional scaling vectors. So for instance, Holy Hammer of Spirals. Who knows, level 20 it might read Holy Hammer's cascade up to 10 times. Or at level 20 it might read base radius is 1.7 meters. Or it might read 20% more damage per power charge removed. Those things we'll have to find out, but what you can count on is that the damage is going to keep going up, and it will go up by more when it comes to spells than it will when it comes to attacks. Now, the first of the 2 gems that was teased today is indeed Holy Hammer of Spirals, and the second one is Reap of Butchering. Let's go through these, but what I want to do is jump back to the start of Granny Games' video and play the video through with a couple of points of commentary on the way, and then we'll do a deep dive into each of these 2 gems.
Hi, I'm Mark Roberts, Game Director on Path of Exile. For the past few leagues, we've been slowly adding Transfigured variants to skills that are still without any. In the Curse of the Allflame update, it's no different. Today, we have a couple to tease you with.
Now, I want to point out here that these are Transfigured gems. This means that they are going to be Labyrinth-exclusive, other than a couple of divination cards that circumvent that requirement, such as the divination card Dying Anguish. But with these divination cards, you don't know which one you're going to get, and as a result, the Labyrinth is the best place to get these. In Path of Exile 1, though, it is generally very specialized characters that do best in the Labyrinth. Everyone can do it, but those specialized characters can just do it miles faster than everyone else can. And if you're playing in Trade League, you can definitely take advantage of that fact by going and trading for the particular Transfigured gem that you want. Yeah, sure, you're going to have to give a divine or so to the person who's doing the Labyrinth farming, and they're going to make a lot of currency doing that. But at the same time, you don't need to sit in the Labyrinth until you get the specific Transfigured gem that you want. Ultimately, how you acquire these is up to you, whether you'd prefer to run the Labyrinth yourself, or whether you'd prefer to outsource that to someone else if you're playing in Trade League. But keep in mind that these gems are going to be loot, rather than something that is just ground clutter, like all the skill gems that you can buy from vendors are.
Holy Hammers of Spirals. A highly stylish new means.
Alright, and here I want to pause this screen because I feel like this really showcases everything that you need to see about this particular gem. Now, this is a character that is an endgame character because of the number of power charges they've got, but also they appear to have a very high minimum number of power charges. That is not how I would be building around this gem. So let's just go through the text here. Slam the ground. This is a slam skill. It has a slam tag. Consuming all of your power charges and calling down a holy hammer from above. Note that you can only consume power charges down to your minimum. So if your maximum is 7 and your minimum is 2 and you're currently sitting at 6 and you activate this skill, you're going to consume 4 charges down to your minimum. Your minimum is 2. And you're going to get the benefits from the skill of consuming 4 of those charges. Further hammers are then called down to cascade in an outward spiral for each power charge consumed. This requires a mace, a scepter, or a staff. And you can see here that Holy Hammers cascade up to 7 times by default, and this is at gem level 1. We don't know if these numbers are going to scale or not, so it might be that it's 7 cascades at all gem levels, or it might be that it is 7 at low gem level and 10 at high, or maybe 12 at high. Or it might be +1 cascade per power charge removed, but maybe that's the quality stat. Who knows on this? If I was to hazard a guess, I would say that the 15% more damage per power charge removed, that is the stat that scales with quality, but Granny Games have definitely surprised me in the past. The core numbers on this though, attack speed 85% of base and 244% of base damage. These are serviceable but unspectacular for a slam. You can definitely get substantially higher than these. The 50% physical conversion into lightning is a little bit of a nuisance. You are definitely going to want to get this up to 100%, And the most convenient other source of physical to lightning conversion is a lightning mastery, and that is not quite enough. That'll get you up to 90% conversion. Whatever you do, you're going to want to convert this 100% because that way you'll have access to more and more reliable scaling vectors, and you'll also become immune to physical reflect. But perhaps the most interesting thing here is the spiraling pattern. And that is the reason that I paused on this specific frame. You'll notice here that this particular circle does not share any overlap with this circle, and that circle doesn't share any with this circle or this circle. They're basically nested together. What we do not know is how this skill is going to scale with sources of increased AoE. If you were to have an additional 150% AoE on your character in total, would it be the case that the gap between these cascades increases, and as a result you hit more of the screen, but you only hit each area of the screen once? Or is it the case that you start getting overlapping areas? The answer is we don't know. I expect that it is probably the less favorable of those two outcomes. So the less favorable of those two is that increased AoE causes the gaps to be further between the circles, but that's something we're going to have to test and find out for certain when we're able to use this gem in game. I think possibly the most important thing to say with this skill though is there is a very real payoff if you can burn a lot of power charges when you're using it. However, burning that number of power charges is not easy. People who have played spellcaster builds, you're probably thinking in your head, oh, power charges, being at maximum power charges is free. You're always at maximum power charges. And on spellcaster builds, yeah, that's true. But if you're playing an attack-based build, you don't have quite as explosive power charge generation, and expending 6, 7, 8, 9 or more power charges on a single attack, this is something that's a bit hard to automate getting those power charges back. So there's definite hoops to jump through if you want to explore this skill. But at the same time, there's some cool things that it's doing. And something I really like about it is that it is reaching behind you, unlike a number of slams. That's something that can be a weakness for some of the slam skills, and so it's important to keep that one in mind. Finally, be a bit remiss of me if I didn't talk about the weapon requirements. Requires a mace, scepter, or staff. In practice at endgame, this probably means a staff. Staves generally tend to be the best of those three categories of weapons, but you definitely have the options of maces and scepters as well. And who knows if there's either been any rebalancing that's gone on the mace or the scepter, or alternately, who knows if there's been anything added that might be particularly appealing in those weapon types. Ultimately, Holy Hammer of Spirals does not fit in existing slam builds. If you want to use this, you're going to need to make something new to use it, which honestly is where I like Transfigured gems to be. Exactly the same is going to be true when we take a look at Reap of Butchery.
Of smiting the unrighteous. And Reap of Butchery, for when you want to get up close and personal with every victim you dispatch.
Now, this gem needs some unpacking, and this gem also is going to need a look at it frame by frame at the damage propagation that it has. So let's start by looking at the differences between this and the classic gem Reap. Firstly, we need to talk about the identity. The identity of Reap as it is usually played is not the only way that you can play it, but the identity of how it is usually played is that players scale the instant application damage component of it. It deals some damage instantly, and it also applies a physical damage over time effect to monsters. It is very viable to scale the physical damage over time component, but the baseline Reap doesn't specialize in it. And most of the way that Reap tends to get played is in conjunction with mines, and with mines, you definitely disregard that damage over time component. It's there, it's a bonus, you're not sad to have it, but you don't go out of your way to make it any better. For Reap of Butchery, forget everything about that. Reap of Butchery is Reap, but losing 40% of its instant application damage. That is a big loss, and it's also a slower skill. This skill takes a full second to cast, whereas baseline Reap is 800 milliseconds. So you get 4 casts in the time that it would take to get 5 out of regular Reap, and each one of them is dealing 40% less damage. Overall, this is going to be 50% less damage for that instant application. So if you're thinking about just scaling the initial hit, completely forget about this. But what is the payoff for making such a large sacrifice there? Well, firstly, the base physical damage per second is 18% higher on Reap of Butchery than it is on Reap. Also, the blood charge scaling is higher. Blood charges are a mechanic that is available both in Reap and in Reap of Butchery. And what they do is they provide you with a scaling up, a ramping up of damage when you're fighting a big single monster that's taking a long time to kill. So when you're just doing general clearing, you'll be sitting at 0 blood charges most of the time. But when you're fighting something that's really tanky and that you need to cast Reap or Reaper Butchery on a bunch of times, you'll gain blood charges, and the scaling that you get for that, on baseline Reap, you get 15% more damage per blood charge. In practice, this means 75% more damage against enemies when you're at full ramp. For Reaper Butchery though, this is 25% more damage per blood charge. This means that as well as the 18% more damage over time that you were getting earlier, you're also getting a second stacking 29% more multiplier in prolonged fights. So that's something that Reaper Butchery has. Additionally, if you are using Val Reap as well, which is not going to be sustainable but is going to be there as a burst benefit, then Val Reap is going to get a bigger version of this benefit. Reaper Butchery will deal 325% base damage while you're under the effect of 9 of these charges, whereas you'll only go up to 235% on regular Reap. So another scaling factor that favors Reaper Butchery here. Secondly, and this is probably the most important thing, the base duration has been scaled up from 1 second to 2 seconds. That is absolutely huge. Thirdly though, and I think this is one of the more complex and tricky parts of Reaper Butchery, this skill has to be centered on yourself. Again, this takes away one of the main scaling vectors of baseline Reap. Baseline Reap has very favorable interactions with Spell Cascade, and those will not apply when it comes to Reaper Butchery. So Reaper Butchery is all about going all in on that damage over time component. Let's take a look at the damage propagation of this skill as well, because that's something that we're going to want to look at frame by frame in order to give you a sense as to exactly how this skill will play out in practice. So this player is walking forwards at the moment, and I'm just going to advance at 1 frame at a time until they start conjuring the scythe. And here you can see the scythe is starting to appear, solidifying, solidifying further, solidifying further, solidifying further. This is not fast damage application, but once it gets going, it's going to go around pretty fast. Currently pay attention to the fact that this is pointing towards approximately 2 o'clock if you consider the entire screen to be a clock face. And here we start going around the circle, and every couple of frames it's advancing. Now it's speeding up, and at this point every single frame it is advancing something like 30 degrees around. And finally it's going to stop, but it's also going to stop pointing back in the direction that it started. So this does have 360 degree coverage. It's been my experience with Reap that it doesn't quite have 360 degree coverage, and that's something I find really frustrating. This actually does look like it gets the full 360 degrees. And then, of course, that is the end of the skill. Monsters have been hit by it, they haven't been killed by the initial hit, they're going to be continuing to attack you. Now, this is going to require a very tanky spellcaster character in order to use well. You need to be able to be up close and personal to the monsters, both during the long cast time of this spell and also during the period where the monsters haven't yet all died as a result of being hit by it. On top of this, it's also a skill that doesn't benefit tremendously from investment into cast speed. It's not that there's no benefit to investing in cast speed, but being a damage over time effect, cast speed is not a damage per second stat, it is a damage uptime stat instead. So you'll definitely need to keep that in mind when you're thinking of exactly how you want to build this type of character. You want to be really, really tanky, and that's something that doesn't necessarily fit into every possible build archetype at the moment. That's why I say Reaper Butchery, not for existing Reap builds, but possibly something that's a new toy for entirely new builds altogether. If I was going to build around this, I would probably go with the Armor and Energy Shield Mastery, assuming that that survives the patch notes. This is the mastery that reads your chest is twice as good if you meet certain conditions. And then I would be going with the Elementalist Golem package. The Elementalist Golem package will give you a fair amount of unconditional damage, a lot of unconditional damage over time multiplier, both of which are stats that scale the amount of damage that you're doing. But at the same time, it will provide you with life recovery, it will provide you with energy shield, and it will provide you with armor. And that's through the use of your Stone Golem. On top of that, you're also going to get a small amount of cast speed, not a tremendous amount. It's not something that would be out of sight massive boost to the amount of cast speed that you're getting, but it is enough to matter, and that can also help you stay alive. So that's be how I would build around this if I was going to. As for the Holy Hammer of Spiraling, that's one that I'd need to see a bunch more testing in game before I would be particularly willing to recommend anything specific for. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there at this point. I think we've gone through these two particular gems. There's nothing more in the rest of the Grinding Gear Games video. So with that in mind, hopefully this has given you some decision paralysis for the build that you want to league start. May your Valorbs have interesting results, and I will see you around probably tomorrow, assuming that there's anything new to report on, which given that we got so much today, I think there probably will be.